access to transport is a social determinant of your health, education, jobs. It's how you access opportunities. And with limited access, you have limited opportunities, and that can potentially entrench disadvantage, and transport disadvantage being one of those things, as well as socioeconomic disadvantage. That's the key thing for me, I think, is around that transport disadvantage piece and how important it is for us to bring that social equity lens more to the things that we do. And I'm thrilled that is an interest of the government, to really be thinking about the well-being of the community.
Well, Julie, thanks so much for coming on to podcast to chat with me today.
Thanks, Emily. I'm really excited to be here.
I was hoping you could do a little bit of an intro to yourself. So your name, your title, the organisation you work for, and also what you're passionate about.
Okay, well, my name's Julie G. I'm the Executive Director of Transport Strategy at Transport for New South Wales. I've been in this role for about 3 years, but I've been with Transport for about 9 years. This is actually my second stint with Transport. I was here for 9 years in sort of the mid-90s to the mid-2000s. I've done lots of different things in my career in transport, but I'm really proud to be a public servant. And one of the reasons I'm really proud to be a public servant is something that is really dear to me is addressing transport disadvantage. That's something that it really sort of, I guess, gets me out of bed in the morning. You know, transport has such a role to play in people's success in life in terms of their being able to access the things that they need. So that's something that really resonates with me.
So on that, are you able to kind of unpack what you mean by transport disadvantage, and why that is important to you?
Sure. So I guess in terms of transport disadvantage, what we're trying to do is understand people's needs to access things, and that the people's ability to access things should not be impinged by their personal circumstances. So their socioeconomic status, their physical abilities, their family responsibilities, their cultural background, where they live. So really, regardless of someone's personal circumstances, they should be able to access the things that they need to have, a good life. And whether that is access to services outside of the home or getting the things that they need to their home from a freight perspective, that's really important. So for me, I think the thing that really resonates with me is around those people that live in more outer metropolitan, rural and regional communities that have that tyranny of distance to access the things that they need, which is often compounded by the lack of public transport options or real options. There may be some services, but they don't actually meet the needs of those people. Then they are beholden to having a car. That can also be a huge problem from a poor socioeconomic background. So those rising costs of fuel, those rising costs just of general cost of living, when you don't have any choice but to have a car, you are in a real strife, and there is limited other types of transport support out there. So community transport, for example, government funded, but it has quite strict eligibility. You can't use it to go to work, for example. You can use it to go to health services. So there's some real challenges out there for people that don't drive or don't have a car or don't have access to the car as much as they need.
Yeah, is the term transport desert still like one that gets thrown around, this idea of...
I haven't heard that for a while, but it is a good description. There's that, as I said, that tyranny of distance. And for those people that live in sort of more central CBD type locations or inner urban areas that have, metros and trains and light rail and bus and ferry, and great active transport, it can sometimes be really hard to understand how challenging it can be for an older person who may have lost their license living in a regional location. Their family may well have moved away for job or education opportunities, and they're sort of stuck in their community without the support they need, reliant on their neighbours or community transport to get to where they need. And we know that social isolation can have a much more adverse impact on somebody's health than actually smoking.
Wow.
Because it really, it's really interesting. There is some research that sort of shows that quite starkly that social exclusion really impacts individuals, but it also has a huge impact on our health system as well, because people are not accessing what they need. They're not getting out and about. People that use public transport, that are able to use public transport, that have good choice in using public transport, they have much more active lives than people that drive. So, yeah, I think it's, that social inclusion, that addressing transport prioritization, transport programs, thinking through the lens of social equity is really important, and it's something that has really been picked up by this government. We've obviously always had a role to play in supporting economic productivity of the state, but really looking at that lens of, okay, well, what about the well-being of people? How are we helping support that? And should we be maybe not always investing in huge mega projects in Greater Sydney? Should we be looking at smaller interventions across a more geographically dispersed parts of the state to really think about how we could be improving people's well-being, not just worrying about the economic productivity piece and congestion busting and those sorts of things.
Yeah, for sure. I know that your team does a lot of collaboration to create strategies and tools to kind of address and anticipate some of the challenges that you've just mentioned, and opportunities within transport.
Yep.
How do you balance the long-term future planning with the immediate demands of the network?
Yeah, good question. It's really hard, and trying to get people to worry about the future when there's significant issues in the here and now is really challenging. So I guess the best way to describe how we do that is that we talk to people about having a vision and validate approach. So we come up with what's the concept that we want to, what we want the future to look like. And that's just not about what we think. It's more engaging with various stakeholders, with councils, with communities, to sort of understand what the vision for the future might be if we were unconstrained. Obviously, financially, we have to consider those sorts of things. But if we could have whatever we wanted, what would success look like? So a good example is connected and automated vehicles. Everyone thinks, oh, it's going to be amazing because I can just, roll out of my front door into this thing and it's going to take me where I need to go, and I'll roll out the other end, and won't it be amazing? I don't think it will be amazing, actually. I think we need to think about what aspects do we want to safeguard. We want to make sure that our communities are safe for people to walk around, that the cabs might not run into them, but it might not make it a very pleasant space when they're just zipping all over, so should we be stopping them going into particular areas? So I guess that's what I mean with vision and validate. We sort of think about what we want to get to in the future, and then we look at the no regret steps we might take to get to that future. So a more realistic example is going from a 6-lane road that's just for general traffic, with maybe parking at some points in time. We may start by removing the parking. We may then commence on looking at a transit lane to start to get people used to the idea that the road is constrained, that we need to look at allocating space better on those roads. We may then go to a bus lane on either side. So we've got 2 lanes of general traffic each way and a bus lane. We may then even move further along and look at dedicated cycleways as well. So it's really not saying, we're not going to try to go from 0 to 100 in one go. We've got an idea of what we think the 100 looks like, and then we try and come up with some steps along the way to get to that final vision. But as I say, that vision really needs to be developed with a whole range of stakeholders, so that there is buy-in that is actually where we want to go. And so that's how we, I guess, balance that view. So we have frameworks like Movement in Place, which really helps us to understand what's the context of a particular road or street. So is it in a residential area? Is it in a high street? What are we trying to balance here in terms of the needs of the users? So we have those sort of frameworks, but then off the back of that, we then develop more detailed guidance to help people implement those things. So we have like a movement in place website, for example. It's for the whole of government resource that anyone can access. It has a whole range of resources on there. So movement in place. It has things like the design of roads and streets, which is some new guidance we've put out. There's network planning and precincts. So they're sort of practical tools that bring movement in place to life. And that movement in place, I guess, is a framework that supports our broader long-term transport vision.
Do you ever find almost like catch-22s where people are like, oh, well, nobody needs this infrastructure now, so why should we put this infrastructure in? I know there was a common one is, say, like EV chargers and things like that, where people are
Yep.
like, oh, but nobody has an EV, so why do we need the EV
What's the
chargers?
point?
But
Yeah,
then,
that's right. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. So interestingly, in the space that I work in, a lot of that for us is around protecting corridors for future transport infrastructure investment. So in down in the Aerotropolis area, for example, the reason that we can get a new metro there is that we've protected a corridor for it to go there. The reason that we have all these tunnels for WestConnex is that we had a corridor reserved on the road level, ground level, and we gave it away. So then we have to tunnel underneath it because we don't have a corridor anymore. So when we're in a fiscally constrained environment like we are at the moment, try to get somebody to worry about protecting a corridor for a piece of infrastructure that might not happen for 40 years is really challenging, because it also has impacts on the people that own those properties that maybe need to be acquired over time as well. So it's really hard to get people interested in the future when there's particular issues on the network in the here and now. And this government has said that they're very focused on restoring reliability in the network, making sure that we can bounce back from disruption. I totally support those goals, but by not future-proofing for future transport investment, so by securing corridors, we're signing ourselves up to spending many, many more billions of dollars than we would have otherwise, because as Sydney grows, obviously areas become rezoned, they become more valuable, and it's far more difficult for us to be able to purchase those properties required to provide that infrastructure. And roads are one thing, but public transport is also really important. So we have to think about those. They're the sorts of things we think about in our space. But as I said, it is challenging getting other people in the organisation to be worried about that when they're when they're trying to make sure that things like WestConnex and some of the challenges that came along with Rozelle Interchange, making sure that they can respond to those, effectively. Yeah, it's a trade-off.
Yeah, makes sense. So you are also involved with the Institute of Transport and Logistic Studies, or ITLS,
Yes.
for short.
Yes.
How did you first become associated with the Institute, and in what capacity do you support ITLS?
No worries. So I actually am a founding staff member of ITLS. So I came across with David and a few other people from Macquarie University in 1991. I'd started working with the previous version of ITLS at Macquarie Uni when I was still a student, working on the feasibility study for the very fast train back in 1987. When I finished my studies in 1988, David offered me a role as a research assistant, and then I came across with them to ITLS. So I stayed there, studied at ITLS, and also worked there for a couple of years. And then I thought, you know what, I maybe need to broaden my horizons. I'm just really focused in the transport space. Maybe I need to learn a bit more. So then I actually went and worked in a town planning firm to sort of get that broader transport and land use understanding. So over the years, I've maintained a relationship with ITLS. So right now, for the last few years, I sometimes do guest lectures there. I've hosted or chaired different, panel discussions, for example. I have contributed to different panel discussions. I'm now on the board of advice. So in lots of different ways. I really value what they do. Professor John Nelson's position is actually funded by Transport for New South Wales. So they are, well, John and his colleagues are often doing different sorts of workshops that they'll invite me along to, or they'll say, are there any particular problems that you're trying to work on at the moment? Is there anything that we can help you with? I can ring David and say, we're doing this piece of work on XYZ. What are your thoughts on it? And within, half an hour, he will have sent me 6 emails with various different academic papers on it. Or if he can't find something, he will then race off and start doing some research just because he wants to, just because he's interested. So, I really benefit from the relationship that I have with them. And I think Transport as an agency, yes, we fund John's position, but I think we get so much more value out of that investment than the other way around.
You did, you touched on it briefly with the board of advice. So you are on the board of advice at the ITLS.
Yes.
What do you think makes that board unique?
Well, it's quite large, but it also has people from Australia, it has people from overseas, it has people from English speaking countries, non-English speaking countries, really different transport challenges. It has the Australian contingent is really diverse. There's people from academia, from industry, government, such as myself. There's a union representative. There's such a range of people that do it. I think also it's really nice having someone like yourself with youth on their side, rather than being a bunch of old people in their 50s plus. I think probably most of us are, other than yourself and the PhD rep. Is it Veronica? Is it Veronica?
She was on the board. I think they cycled through. I think I saw on LinkedIn, she just finished her thesis, but they've got 2 new ones on there now.
Yeah. So it's yourself as a younger person and the PhD candidates, and then the rest of us are pretty old. So I think it's nice to have that sort of youth and enthusiasm there. The technical skills that you bring are amazing. You just see things through a different lens, and that's really, really important. And I think that's the beauty of the board. There are so many different people there. You're not going to get groupthink, which I think is really important when you're trying to be an academic institution that is well regarded, and it is worldwide. It is prolific in its release of academic research and papers and so on. So I really enjoy getting together every quarter with the other members of the board and just learning more about what they do and having some really good discussions. And I think it's brilliant, actually. I was very chuffed to be asked to be on the board.
So was I. I think they do a good job of balancing maybe youth and wisdom.
in a sense. It's important.
Okay, so we've talked about a couple of different things. We've talked about transport disadvantage, and then balancing I want it now versus I might need this later.
Yep.
So if you had to kind of distill the important parts of the conversation into like one key message, what would you like that key message to be?
Okay. For me, I think the key message is that access to transport is a social determinant of your health, education, jobs. It's how you access opportunities. And with limited access, you have limited opportunities, and that can potentially entrench disadvantage, and transport disadvantage being one of those things, as well as socioeconomic disadvantage. That's the key thing for me, I think, is around that transport disadvantage piece and how important it is for us to bring that social equity lens more to the things that we do. And I'm thrilled that that is an interest of the government, to really be thinking about the well-being of the community.
And my last question, how can people reach out to learn more, either to you or any relevant links from, say, Transport for New South Wales?
Sure. Well, we obviously have Transport for New South Wales obviously has its own website, but I did mention before we have a Movement in Place website. So it's just movementinplace.nsw.gov.au. There's lots of great resources there. We also have resources on LinkedIn, so you can follow Transport for New South Wales on LinkedIn. You can find out the various projects that are happening when new pieces of infrastructure are opening. So we've obviously got the light rail in Parramatta going to be opening soon. The metro is going to be opening soon, Sydney Gateway. So there are a few things happening there. So yes, definitely look out on LinkedIn to see what's going on. Movement in Place also post on LinkedIn. I post regularly on LinkedIn. So I think there's some of the ways that people can get in touch, and my details are on LinkedIn if people want to connect with me directly.
Perfect. Well, Julie, thanks so much for your time and to chatting with me on the podcast.
Thanks, Emily. I really enjoyed it. Cheers.
To learn more about any of the guests that we have on the Byte Size podcast, you can check out our show notes at compassiot.substack.com. Alternatively, if you'd like to know more about the company that runs this podcast, Compass IoT, you can visit our website, which is compassiot.com.au. Until next time.